For a moment. There we go. Welcome, everyone. This is, I don't know what number class, sixth class, I think, in this series on getting to know your mind. So, again, thank you all for your understanding tonight and allowing me to recuperate at home. I think I do have more than allergies,
Yeah,
but
good.
it's yet to be
Second
seen.
feeling, we can
So,
hear you.
anyway, hello, everyone at the Gompa. Sorry I'm not there with you, and welcome everyone else online. Let's go ahead and start with the recitation of the prayers that we usually do, beginning with the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha, which we'll do 3 times together. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. Let's just do this in English tonight. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryata Yami. Go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jang tu bardu dakni kyapsu chi daki chunyen gi pe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok sangye chodang soki choknam la jang tu bardu dakni kyapsu chi Daki chunyen gi pe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shok. Right, let's do a short meditation as usual, just spending the first few minutes focusing on the breath, trying to kind of keep the mind somewhat calm and focused, whatever way you prefer to use the breath. Just bring your awareness there and try not to let it wander. After a few minutes in silence doing this, I'll lead you in a short reflection so we can set our motivation for the teaching tonight. So let's go ahead and begin the meditation now. So now, to set our motivation for our time together tonight, let's reflect briefly on this mind of anger that we covered in our last class a few weeks ago. And this is, again, one of these crazy roommates that we have in our mind, one that we need to be particularly alert and attentive to its arising so that we can make sure that we do everything we can to confront and avert it, to not allow that mind of anger to arise. We're certainly living in a time where there seems to be many things that we could have anger about. And the first thing I want you to reflect on in setting your motivation is to recall that we can oppose the actions of beings. We can do whatever we can to try to curtail some of the effects of the actions that come from their own angry and deluded minds. But we have to hold beings in a very special light, recognizing that they are just like us. They have the seeds of anger in their own minds, just like we do. They meet with objects, experiences that are unpleasant, just like we do. And they engage in that inappropriate mental attention, that kind of exaggeration of the negative qualities of things that feeds into the mind of anger, that causes it to arise very strongly. So they're subject to the same process that we are. And as we went through in that class, when we talked about anger and its antidotes, one of the most powerful antidotes is to hold those beings through the lens of love and compassion. Because we see that, yes, their actions can be opposed, but the beings themselves are under the control of these same factors that we ourselves have to experience. So again, try to think of those beings who you are in opposition to in this country, in this world, beings who you might think of as sort of the troublemakers, the ones who are causing difficulty and problems. And as we set our motivation, let's look at them in particular, because they are often the beings we have the hardest time embracing with our hearts. And I think again that these beings will have to suffer from their actions. They will have to experience a negative karma of all the things that they have done and will do under the influence of these delusions. They're an object of our compassion and love. If they were to be free of their suffering and have complete and total happiness, they wouldn't be deluded any longer. They wouldn't be engaged in these kind of practices of upsetting others and causing harm to others. So really try to hold that awareness of sentient beings, particularly those that you find difficult, through that view. These are beings just like ourselves. have a greater amount of delusion and negative actions at this time, but they too are to be embraced with compassion and love. And from this, we can extend that same compassion and love to the countless strangers, those beings who we don't know in this life. So many of these beings in that category, in this world as well as the other realms of existence that the Buddha taught. And then there are, of course, our friends and dear ones as well, those to whom our hearts naturally open. But try to have this love and compassion that embraces all of these beings, because we see that there really is no difference in our fundamental situation. Right now, we're all under the control of these factors, and the only appropriate response is to have a compassion that seeks these beings to be free from suffering and the causes of suffering, and a love that wants them to have happiness and the causes of happiness. So, informed by those two thoughts, generate the motivation of bodhicitta, the wish to be here, to work on ourselves, to understand our own minds, our own problem roommates, so that we can begin to address what's happening inside ourselves first, making the corrections we need to make, so we'll be in a better position to benefit others. We want to ideally correct our minds to the state of Buddhahood, this unparalleled state of completely perfect wisdom, compassion, loving kindness, power, a state in which we can then work tirelessly and spontaneously for the benefit of all beings. So hold that mind of bodhicitta very deeply in your heart, so it informs everything we do together for this next hour and a half. And you can open your eyes fully. We'll begin the class. Okay, so again, it's been a few. Oh, Eloise, yes. Can you hear me okay? Okay, just go
Yes,
ahead.
I was going to ask if Roger, oh, and he just did it. If you could move your camera a little bit so we didn't have to watch your fan going around in circles. But you just did it. So
Okay,
thank
good,
you.
good. I wasn't even watching it. I had my eyes mostly closed. So anyway, but that's okay. All right. Okay, so we're back. We are here to again go through this text that we are working with, written by Venerable Gyatso, a wonderful monk in our tradition. There was actually an article during the time that I was away in FPMT's newsletter on him, celebrating, I think, 50 years of his involvement with the organization. So he's been around a long time, has a lot of wisdom. So I will refer to his text as I usually do as we go through this. Tonight, what we're going to do is sort of take off from this root delusion. And again, it's called one of the three poisons. We have attachment, anger, and then ignorance. We haven't yet talked about ignorance. We're going to go into that in the future. But these three are really the principal causes of all of our misery and the misery of all beings. And the root of ignorance, as we'll see, needs to be abolished. But in the meantime, we have to work on attachment and anger, these two kind of energies that are being driven by what is pleasant and an overlay of exaggerating the qualities of those pleasant objects and grasping at them, not wanting to be separated from them. And then what is unpleasant, which the mind of anger exaggerates those qualities that are unpleasant and then wants to push that out of our experience and maybe even harm the object or the being who is causing that unpleasant experience. So we're going to talk tonight about kind of the secondary delusions that are involved with anger. Remember, we did this for attachment. There were a number of those that we took a look at. Tonight we're going to go into, and let me go ahead and put it on the screen. We have that handout that I put together that has all 51 mental factors. These are, again, often referred to as the 20 close afflictions. How I'm approaching this course is I'm not going through all of these together. I'm kind of doing them in conjunction with the root delusion that they come from. All of these five, the first on this list, are derived from anger. So we'll see as we go through them that there is a flavor of anger to them. There's, an annoyance or irritation at what is going on that is unpleasant for us, but particular thoughts that inform that, as we'll see when we go through those. And the next set of three was what we went through when we went through attachment, miserliness, haughtiness, and excitement. So we'll again make our way through this entire list of these 20 close afflictions as we go through the course. But tonight we have these five that we're going to look at: belligerence or wrath, resentment or vengeance, spite, jealousy or envy. And we'll talk a little bit about those two words. Technically, they're not quite the same thing, but they get interchanged quite frequently. And then harmfulness or cruelty. Again, these are all derived from what we looked at previously in regard to the mind of anger. So I think what we'll do to get things started is let's go ahead and take a look at the text from Venerable Gyatso. Let me move it over just a little so it's mostly on the screen there. And what we're going to do, this is page 115, I think, or 16. Let's see, 115. All right. So on page 115 of your text, this is where the initial kind of close afflictions are set out. This first group of five, again, we looked at the second group previously, but this first group of five that are related to anger. So the first one is described by Venerable Gyatso in this way: belligerence or wrath is an extreme form of anger. Continuing down with the highlighted section, it is an intense attitude wanting to inflict harm on that object, such as physically striking someone. So again, belligerence is a much more heightened form where we actually are going to be prompted through the mind of anger that has been strengthened to want to actually do harm to another. And of course, this is where it becomes quite problematic, because not only are we harming our own minds through having a pattern of anger and belligerence, but we are also potentially going to harm the possessions, bodies, what have you, of others. We're certainly going to mess with their peace when we become belligerent and when we act from that place. So let's go then to the slides, where I do have some additional information that I've pulled from mostly Geshe Rabten's book, which I've been using as a second resource in a sense, though there's a few other resources I've been using here and there. Whoops, let me go ahead and just review really quickly. This is where we are in terms of our overall approach to this, is we're working first with the 6 root afflictions, anger or aversion. I might mention that ignorance is next on the list, but we're actually going to move to pride next and then come back to ignorance, just so you know. But this is, again, we're still in the category of that energy of anger or aversion, but we're going to look at those close afflictions. Again, these are the page numbers in your text from Venerable Gyatso that you can refer to. And I'll post these slides on the Google Drive after the class tonight. This is how Geshe Rabten describes this. Wrath or belligerence is a mental factor that, due to the increase of anger, is a thoroughly malicious state of mind, wishing to cause immediate harm. It has the function of directly connecting the person who intends to cause harm with the actual means to do so. So when we've reached that level of wrath or belligerence, then we are seeking an actual means to cause harm to that being who has offended us, who has caused us some pain or difficulty in our lives. So we can see again that wrath is not a very good mind to follow. It's much increased power of anger. Anger itself, as I mentioned when we went through it, we can see already has different levels, gradations. This is towards the top of it, right, where we've approached things like rage and all of those. We don't have those set out separately, some of these, but we do know that anger starts with just some level of aversion, some unpleasant experience that we are having to go through, and that we start thinking about it in a way that is unhealthy. Because again, even just at the irritation or kind of aversion level, it's already kind of moving in that direction. Then it can become an annoyance. It can become something where there's actually anger. It can become something where there is hatred and where there is rage, and wrath is another one of those that kind of fits into that category. Obviously, we want to keep anger from arising to that level. So all the antidotes that we talked about last time to anger would need to be applied as in the same way. Why do we want to make sure that we catch anger whenever it's arising at whatever level? And certainly if it becomes more fully fledged as belligerence or wrath, well, then we have to try to rein it in. Pema Chodron, in her wonderful book on the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Shantideva's text, was originally published as No Time to Lose, and I think it's now published as Becoming Bodhisattvas or something like that. Anyway, in her whole chapter where she talks about all of this approach to working with your mind, I think it's even chapter 5. Before we get in, chapter 6 is the one on patience. And there's a lot of, again, wonderful quotes that you can use there to remind yourself about the need for patience as you confront things that are challenging for you. But chapter 5 talks about kind of the need for a sort of guarding alertness, a need for us to sort of try to catch things as quickly as we can. And of course, that's one of the challenges, right? Because we have like a train, the anger train that leaves from our station pretty regularly, right? And we don't know how to stop it sometimes. We have to have something to kind of keep it in the station and let it stop it from going in that direction. But once it's taken off, she talks about kind of four different points at which you can catch the mind of anger or any of these delusions. The first one is just when it's a little nudge. She even calls this a shenpa. Shenpa is kind of like this attachment we have to things needing to be the way we want them to be. And as soon as that gets kind of touched and we are feeling like, this is going in the wrong direction, that's the easiest point to catch it in some ways in terms of countering it because it's really quite small then. It's just a little movement forward of the train out of the station. It's very difficult to catch in terms of our attention and our sort of introspection, kind of paying attention to what's going on in the mind. Because once more, we're very acclimated to that train kind of taking off and just following it. And that's the whole purpose of this course, right? Is so that we become more aware of what's happening at those initial moments. Recall that, again, we're having an unpleasant feeling or sensation that is entering into our sphere of experience. We then are generating all kinds of thoughts about that. We have to kind of change those thoughts. We talked about those antidotes previously. The one that we meditated on tonight is if this is a person who is doing something harmful to you, to try to see them through the lens of love and compassion, to see them as a being that's really only worthy of those two virtuous minds, is really not a worthy object of anger. Remember that quote I had from Kunu Lama Rinpoche, who taught the Dalai Lama Shantideva's text, where he says, anyone you meet has either realized emptiness, reality, or they haven't. And if they haven't realized reality, well, then they're really just an object of compassion because we're all in the same boat, all under the control of these delusions. So before it gets to the level of wrath, before that train takes off and we're kind of going at full speed ahead and potentially harming ourselves and others with our actions, then it's good to have some sort of force of counteracting it. But recall that this is a process, and we may have times where we get on the train and we just start taking off and it goes to full speed, and then we do whatever we were going to do, and then after the fact we go, I stepped in it again. I did it again. That's sometimes where it starts. I remember when I was first working on counteracting anger, when I was living in the Bay Area and driving a lot on the freeways in the Bay Area, which are even more nuts now from what I've seen. I wasn't driving this time. I tend not to drive when I go to the Bay Area to let other people who have perhaps a better knowledge of what roads to go on and what freeways are best and what have you. But I was catching it at the end. I was like going, I just flipped that guy off, or I just, did something really negative, and I don't want to do that. So even catching it at the end is a wonderful place to catch it. But obviously, the more dangerous the mind is, if it's a mind of wrath or belligerence, we can do a lot of damage before we get to that. So you don't want to go to that place and have this, altercation with somebody on the road and have a road rage incident because you were following that mind and not doing something to antidote it, to alleviate it. So this one in particular, I just wanted to point out because this is perhaps one of the more advanced ones, but nonetheless, we do see some of these that are going to follow as kind of taking off from that mind of belligerence and continuing to want to harm others in very unfortunate ways. Remember that we will experience the karma of those actions if we follow them. If we're able to cut it off at some point, again, Pema Chodron highlights 4 different places. She uses this wonderful verse from Shantideva where he says, be like a log or be like a piece of wood, which is hard to do, right? To just kind of be there and somebody's saying all this stuff to you and just be unaffected, not emotional, not really reacting, just kind of taking it in and just generating what thoughts you can that are positive. But a piece of log usually doesn't have many thoughts, right? It's at least being in this place of stillness, of not reacting immediately. And then when we've had time, we can perhaps come up with a more effective response. So the mind of, again, love and compassion, or at least some understanding of what's going on, will be much more appropriate than following that mind of anger, wrath, belligerence, what have you. So again, that's one that we need to be very attentive to. The next one on our list of these 5 is vengeance or resentment. It's described here by Geshe Rabten as a knot in the mind that, without forgetting, firmly holds on to the fact that in the past one was harmed by a particular person. We've all had experience with this, right? Somebody got our goat at one point and we just can't let it go. We just hold on to it and continue to think about it and ruminate on it and reinforce it and make it stronger. As it says there, it's a basis for impatience and thus performs the function of repeatedly bringing about anger and the pain of being unable to bear something. It's kind of that recycling around, continuing to feel negative thoughts towards that being who harmed us, who, caused us to have some pain. Vengeance, he goes on to say, is a deep kind of hatred that keeps a grudge within the recesses of the mind without necessarily letting itself become manifest externally. Oftentimes we have that, it kind of festers inside of us and just continues to grow until, we sort of explode like a volcano. He goes on to say, in fact, someone may be very pleasant and agreeable towards us, even while bearing a strong grudge against us. Maybe we've even done that with others, where we kind of wait in hiding, uh, waiting until the right moment for us to strike back. But we might be very nice to the person superficially, but in our minds, this kind of vengeance, this mind of revenge is just festering. I want to talk about this a little bit and go to take a look at what Venerable Gyatso says as well. But I think I've made this comment to this group. I know I've made it a number of times, but I find it really disturbing how many pieces of entertainment, whether we talk about movies or TV shows or whatever, are built around the concept of revenge and vengeance. Like somebody gets offended at the beginning of it in some way. Maybe they even lose someone very dear to them. And I get it. That's a very painful experience to have someone very dear to you murdered or, whatever. And then the whole rest of the movie or TV series is about them taking vengeance on that person, trying to find their way to get back at them in some way, usually pretty horrific ways, right? It's not just a little slap on the wrist at that point. It's like, I'm going to totally take them out, right? So again, this is a kind of a disturbing trend. I think I mentioned that when we were talking about things that influence us from outside, one of those factors that causes the arousal, the stimulation of the delusions. So when we do see this, and we kind of recognize that we can be influenced by these patterns of taking revenge. We have a whole culture that embraces this and actually applauds it. At the end of these movies, people are delighted that the hero, in quotes, has been able to take revenge on the person who wronged them. It's really quite disturbing when we look at it because those patterns do have some effect on people. They do lead them to think that this is a noble behavior. This is actually what we should be doing, is putting people in their places who do things that are wrong towards us. And as I said in the meditation tonight, you can say that the action those beings did is absolutely wrong. It's a negative action of killing someone or in some way harming someone, what have you, and they'll have to face the consequences of that karmically. But to do something that's negative towards them in response to that or as a reaction to that is really not healthy because it just keeps the circle of getting caught up in karmic patterns with another being. It keeps it all going so that we'll end up inevitably meeting that being again and running into the same situation of being harmed by them. And then we harm them back and then they harm us and then we harm them. And I mean, look at what goes on again in parts of our world where we have this going back for centuries where two nations continue to war against each other because nobody's willing to kind of be the adult in the room and say, okay, I'm going to stop contributing to this unhealthy pattern. I know it's difficult. I'm not saying this is an easy choice, but it makes sense karmically. And of course, people don't have the understanding of karma. It can be very hard for them to adopt those kinds of behaviors. But this is really what we're trying to do whenever we're countering these minds as they're arising, is to try to hold that view that I want to be detached from this. Remember that we had that as one of our antidotes as well. If I'm experiencing something negative right now that I find unpleasant and almost intolerable, well, why would I create the causes karmically for me to have that experience again? It's not even in my own self-interest to do that, much less, in the interest of the other being who I harm and then get them further entangled with me karmically so that they keep harming me and I keep harming them and we never break free. So we have to begin to use some wisdom in regard to this. We have some of our antidotes that are more about the qualities of the heart, like love and compassion. And then we have other qualities that are more about, I just need to apply some good old-fashioned Buddhist wisdom and say, hey, this is not a good place for me to be. And again, if we step in it, that's fine. We'll at least have the cognizance that we did something that we would prefer not to do. then we can begin to work on it. And as I've been emphasizing in regard to working with these mental factors, the afflictions in particular, we have to become familiar with these antidotes. We have to work on meditating on them. If you find one of these to be particularly useful for you, it really seems to kind of resonate with where you're at and speak to you, well, then meditate on that so that you have it to draw from when you encounter something that is difficult. If you don't have that familiarity with it, well, then good luck. I mean, we're just going to be kind of grasping at straws at that point, and we don't really know what we need to do. Because recall, the mind of anger, when it arises, is a very confusing mind. It's not a mind that sees things clearly, it's not a mind that thinks about things in a very rational way. So we need that rationality that informs our minds ahead of time. So when we meet these things, we go, this is the time I need to apply that understanding. This is the time I need to apply these other qualities of the heart or what have you. That's the whole point of all of this again. Let's go to Venerable Gyatso's text on this and see what he says about vengeance. He calls it resentment, which is a perfectly fine word, right? Resentment or vengeance is continual anger or grudge holding, a lasting belligerence. After belligerently striking someone who comes near us, the anger can fester in our mind. And when we meet them again, we strike them once more, or we lie in waiting, waiting for the perfect opportunity to get back at them. This maintenance of an angry mind is the mental factor of resentment. I might mention that another antidote, of course, to resentment is forgiveness. We don't, I don't have a separate slide on that, but we went through forgiveness. Was it earlier this year or December? I think it was December. I did a little three-part course on forgiveness. You can find those teachings and the materials for working with forgiveness. Forgiveness is our way of letting go of that grudge, letting go of that hot coal. This is how the one Buddhist saying talks about how, like, if we have this resentment, this grudge towards somebody, it's like we're carrying a hot coal, waiting to throw it at the person. Or a phrase that comes out of Venerable Gyatso's book, we're swallowing poison and waiting for them to die. Who's getting burned by carrying around this hot coal? Not the other person. You are. You're carrying this person with you. You're living them. You're letting them live rent free in your mind, as they often say, and you're continuing to carry that torch of anger, resentment, vengeance until the right time to throw it. But in the meantime, you're the one getting burned. You've caused yourself unbelievable torture. So again, forgiveness can be also a nice process to start to work with untangling some of that resentment that we have towards others so that we don't have it quite so strongly. Let's go back to Venerable Gyatso to the next one. This is spite. Spite arises from anger and resentment and is a mental factor that wants to verbally abuse others. I think it's not just verbal. I mean, if I looked up spite in the dictionary, and the English word spite at least has a connotation of anything that will harm another. But oftentimes it is, verbally accosting people. So it's a bit like the resentment that arises, but not to physically harm them, but to actually kind of put them in their place the next opportunity you get to really say something negative about that person who harmed you. He goes on to say, when we have faults to which we are strongly habituated, we refuse to listen to any criticism and we react indignantly with spite, denying any offense and abusing our critics. The spiteful mind is a very painful mind to have. Again, it's very similar to that idea of holding on to the hot coal. We continue to carry that around until we have this opportunity to get back at people through cutting words, harsh speech, what have you. Again, not a useful way to go about living one's life. And we engage in more negative karma by the virtue of that mind being perpetuated and then the eventual action of some sort of verbal accosting of that person that is based on that building up of spite in our own minds. Here it says spite is a mental factor that, when preceded by wrath, belligerence, or vengeance, or resentment, again, those different terms for this in English, and as an outcome of malice, a sort of malicious mind, a mind of ill will, motivates one to utter harsh speech in reply to unpleasant words said by others. It acts as a basis for accumulating unwholesome actions through speech and causes the mental happiness of oneself and others to be destroyed. How can you be happy if you're walking around all spiteful, waiting for that opportunity to say something really horrible to that person? Or again, it doesn't have to wait. Sometimes you say it right there. You have this spiteful mind that is immediately replying in a way that is unhealthy, that is only going to, again, exacerbate the situation. Like I said, these road rage incidences are often the case of that. Somebody says something to the other person, you're such a jerk. What were you doing? And then the other person says, I'm no jerk. You're the jerk or whatever. We're using stronger language than that, obviously. But, it's that kind of back and forth, like a tennis game. And what happens in any tennis game? One person has to win, right? They'll do whatever they can to put the other person down to a place where they can walk away the victor, which again is not a healthy place to be. They've engaged in unbelievable negative karma on the basis of that. The next one is referred to as envy or jealousy, and I'll talk in a moment about how technically those two minds are actually different, but nonetheless, what we're referring to here is what is more akin to envy. An envious mind this is a distinct mental factor, envy, that out of attachment to respect and material gain is unable to bear the good things others have. When we have other people that have good fortune in their lives, who have more money or resources or a more beautiful car or whatever, I don't know, I'm using pretty mundane examples. I suppose we can even have it in regard to spiritual qualities. We see other people, we might be envious of the way that they practice and the way that they seem to show themselves as more grounded in Buddhist practice. But this is not good. This is a mind that is obsessing about what others have and wanting us to have it ourselves. Now, you might wonder, well, isn't that a mind of attachment? There is a level of attachment involved in this, but it's actually much more akin to anger because we are having some, again, resentment of what the other person has. That's what's causing us to have the mind of envy, is because we feel that they shouldn't have what they have. It says there, it thus brings about deep mental turmoil. It is a basis for the immediate arisal of unhappiness in the mind and has the function of causing one's own good things to become exhausted because you are not delighting in the good fortune that that other being has. You are having that resentment and that wish that you had what they have, that. And it might even lead you to steal from them, to take what they have because you feel that they don't deserve it, you deserve it, right? So lots of things can arise from the mind of envy. Let's talk a little bit about how these two are distinguished in more technical ways. Nonetheless, again, in common usage, they get to be interchangeable. Envy is described in the Free Dictionary online as a feeling of discontent and resentment aroused by and in conjunction with desire for the possessions or qualities of another. So we're observing someone else who has what we would ideally like to have, what we think we even deserve to have, perhaps, as I just said. So it's a mind that is not content with what we are currently possessing, and we want the possessions of another, or at least, have that mind that feels that they shouldn't have them. Jealousy, on the other hand, is a state of being fearful or wary of being supplanted or being apprehensive of losing affection or position. So oftentimes the word jealousy comes into play, like in relationships, when you have an attractive partner, for example, who other people are looking at with wandering eyes, right? And maybe your partner's looking at them with wandering eyes. And suddenly you're jealous because what you have in your life, you're afraid that you're going to lose it. Jealousy is more about what you own that you don't want others to have. Envy is more about what others own that you would like to have and possess. That's the technical, distinction between these two. In that passage from the Free Dictionary, it goes on to say traditional usage holds that we are jealous when we fear losing something that is important to us, and we are envious when we desire that which someone else has. Pretty much what I just said, right? In just different words. In common usage, this distinction is not always observed, and jealousy and jealous are often used in situations which involve envy. Nonetheless, I mean, I'm just pointing this out. They're both not good minds to have, right? Maybe the second one, what we might call jealousy, is perhaps a little more akin to attachment because there it's things that we are already attached to that we have in our lives, such as a partner or, the possessions that we have that someone else is looking at with their desire to possess those. So maybe it is kind of our setting it up through our mind of attachment to not want to be separated from those objects. But it has that kind of basis. It could move in the direction of being also kind of the unpleasant experience of someone threatening that security that we have. This often happens, right? We like to think that all the things in our life that bring us happiness are going to stay there and no one's ever going to cheat on us and no one's ever going to do anything, to hurt us in some way. And then when people kind of threaten that and we're very jealous of those people and wanting to hold on to our possessions so they don't get them, then it can result in, of course, some sort of minds of anger kind of moving in that direction where we have some resentment towards that person. But mainly we're going to talk about this in terms of the first one, the envy. where someone has something else that you would like to have. In that way, there is some relation to attachment, but it's kind of a mind that is angry and upset, and has resentment because those beings possess that and we don't. Let me finish off what Geshe Rabten says, and then we will go to see what Venerable Gyatso has. Envy often contains an element of fear. It sees, for example, that someone may be about to gain a position that one wanted very much for oneself. Desirous of the position and afraid that one might not gain it, one starts to dislike and even hate the person who appears to be the cause of the problem, right? Because they are going to take what we, ideally want for ourselves. We're not going to gain things that we wish to have, and that person is going to have them instead. So we have a mind of anger. I like how it mentions fear. I've taught on fear a number of times before. I think I've done the class on fear for all of you at City Garba, but fear I see is mostly related to the mind of anger. Because fear is when we have some apprehension about having to experience something unpleasant. In this case, the unpleasantness of somebody actually having something that we would like, that we desire. When that happens, well, then this is a negative state of mind. It's something very unpleasant. Fear is not on the list. If you look at that 51 mental factors, I may have touched on this before, but fear is not there. And it's kind of interesting that it's not there. Again, I see it quite akin to at least the diluted version of fear as very akin to this mind of anger or resentment. Like, when someone has something, again, that in this case of envy, that we feel this lack, we feel this kind of pain of not having what they possess, or any of the other ones that we've gone through it, there's usually an unpleasant sensation. It's rooted in some sort of aversion energy. But nonetheless, there are wholesome versions of fear. I mean, those of you who've studied the stages of the path, the Lamrim texts, know that we actually use a wholesome fear to have a fear of death, to have a fear of future rebirths that might be unfavorable, to have a fear of being in samsara, to even have a fear of others having to be in samsara, that we don't want to see them suffer. I mean, there's lots of levels of fear and different types of fear. Fear is actually one of the motivating factors for refuge. This mind that finds some safe direction in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha because we feel that the three jewels, can protect us from that fear, can address that fear. So this is the idea behind fear. I'm just going to talk about it here. Probably won't talk about it again in regard to these mental factors unless it comes up in some of our commentary. But know that in my estimation, it's more akin to that anger energy. But recall again that we can have more wholesome versions of fear that are actually, we're encouraged to develop on the path. Because if we don't have some trepidation about our future lives, for example, what's the impetus for us to engage in wholesome behavior and to abandon what is unwholesome? We have to have that impetus in order to have an effect on what we might experience in the future so we don't have that fear. We can rest assured that we've done everything we can to avoid creating the causes for that fearful experience. That's the idea behind that. Let's go back to Geshe Rabten again. There's, I think, one or two more slides. The antidote often is rejoicing. This is from Kathleen MacDonald's book, How to Meditate, which I think most of you have read or at least familiar with. It's the primer we use for meditation guidance in our tradition. Rejoicing in the well-being of others is a powerful antidote to jealousy and resentment. Frequent responses when someone else succeeds or is happy. Those jealousy and resentment often come up when we see someone else happy, getting what they want that will make them happy, and we think that we deserve that should be ours. Jealousy is a tense, unhappy state of mind. Again, this is more akin to envy, but nonetheless, it's an unhappy state of mind that cannot bear the happiness of others. Rejoicing, on the other hand, is light and open, a loving response that allows us to share in the happiness of others, right? The benefit then is immediate, and we also create the cause to experience happiness ourselves in the future. Now, again, I know it's not easy to rejoice in the good fortune of others. We might see others who have a lot in this world who aren't necessarily doing wonderful things with what they have. They might be using that for more mayhem in our world and causing a lot more pain and suffering. Well, we're not rejoicing in those actions of what they're doing with that. All those resources they got, again, are a karmic creation of their past generosity that have ripened into them having that good fortune. We can rejoice in what they must have done to create that, while once more taking issue with what they are doing, having attained all that good fortune. If all they're doing is squandering it and spending it on, frivolous activities and things in the world, well, that's very sad that they aren't actually benefiting others with those resources. So again, this is rejoicing is a very powerful mind. We've touched on it in a number of courses, and it's something that you can use when you do see others who have something that you feel you would rather have some level of envy. Well, rejoice that they actually created the causes for it. That's why they're experiencing it. That's the only reason why they're experiencing it is because they did create those causes. There's no other way they can experience that. Okay, we're actually going on to the next one. So let's go back. It's only, I think that's the last one of these five that are kind of related or derived from the mind of anger. See what's said about jealousy by Venerable Gyatso. He says, jealousy or envy is a mental factor that is disturbed by seeing the good qualities of others. Its entity is anger. But as I mentioned, there's also some desire for the good things possessed by others. Jealous persons can never remain happy because as soon as they see good things possessed by others, they become disturbed. Remember that this is kind of the mind of these asuras, these demigods who are like really jealous of the good possessions that the gods have. The gods, of course, have pride, which we'll talk about either later tonight or next week. But that prideful mind, does cause its own problems for the demigods or the asuras. They are jealous of everything that the gods have, not even being able to enjoy what they do possess, which is already pretty incredible. Amazing things that they've created through the good karma of being born in Asura, demigod. It says here there can also be an element of fear and competition in jealousy. We may see somebody about to get something we want, or somebody being friendly with the person we hope will become our closest friend, and afraid that we will miss out. What's that? FOMO? Is it fear of missing out? I heard this phrase many years ago, and I was kind of, oh, they've got a name for that too. We can have that fear of missing out. Like, I wanted that. I wanted that friend. I want this person in my life, and now they're being stolen away from me. Yeah. So anyway, based on that, we start to dislike and even hate the person who appears as an obstacle to our getting what we want. Again, so we see how jealousy, or again, envy more appropriately, plays a role in the arisal of unhealthy reactions to the good fortune of others. Harmfulness or cruelty is the opposite of non-harmfulness. We're going to take a look at that next. Non-harmfulness is one of the 11 virtuous mental factors. Remember, I've been going through those here and there. When we have something that is the opposite, the exact mind we want to cultivate in opposition to any of these afflictions, we're going to take a look at those in this context so that we can cover them all in the kind of area of which their counterparts are being set forth. Harmfulness is a lack of compassion that wishes to disturb or harm the minds or bodies of others. This is something we see in our world, a complete lack of conscience or caring when we are harming others, when we're engaged in cruel behavior. And it's really sad to see, because it's so uncalled for, right? And it's actually going to create once more suffering in the moment by those who are the objects of that cruelty, and then patterns that will karmically cause suffering for the being who is cruel, who's not practicing compassion at that time. So again, this is something I think we can all see pretty clearly. This cruelty or harmfulness is said to be the exact opposite of compassion. It's what we often call the far enemy. If someone has gotten to that place of cruelty towards other beings, there's no room for compassion, it seems. But I might mention that teaching, I think I've also used this. I tend to use a lot of the same stuff. You'll hear it again sometimes in my teachings, but there's that wonderful idea that comes from Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche that Pema Chodron often alludes to, that all beings have kind of a soft spot. She points off into the center of our heart, which is in Tibetan Buddhism where our subtlemost consciousness is. But if we think about that soft spot that we all have, that's the place where we stay in touch with the suffering of others and our concern for others. It's a place we want to live from, ideally, on the Buddhist path, so that we're not kind of shutting it off and not being present to our own opening of our hearts to the situation of others. Pema Chodron says that those who have become cruel are simply beings who have armored the soft spot quite a bit, right? To where they just are not in touch with it, but they still have it. And I likes to use that phrase from Leonard Cohen, right? That there's always a crack where the light gets in. Well, there's some crack where all of that armoring can be released. I've told you the story of Vinnie Ferraro before. I won't repeat it again, but where he was able to have some stimulus that broke through that caused that to just kind of open wide up. It's kind of like in The Grinch Who Stole Christmas, all right? Where all of a sudden the heart grows and it becomes like outside of the box where the Grinch had kind of kept it all inside as a tiny little heart or whatever. Kind of an interesting image that Dr. Seuss used for that. But that's something we all have. All beings have a soft spot. It's just a matter of trying to get through to it, try to open it. And of course, you need to have some sort of catalyst to do that. We need the Dharma, we need teachers of the Dharma, we need beings who can in some way manifest that more compassionate, caring stance. And then that cruelty, that harmfulness can be abandoned. But until then, people can do a lot of cruel things. They can be cruel to animals in particular, which of course we see in our world every day, right? I mean, I'm on the list for many of these animal agencies, and I can't believe how many petitions I've signed for this incident with an animal or these particular animals that are being harmed at some zoo in Pittsburgh or something, and all these various beings, and it breaks your heart to see the cruelty that humans can inflict on another species on this planet. So, but they inflict an awful lot of suffering on each other. Human beings are doing this right now in the conflicts that are happening in our world. So, again, we have to see that we have a tendency as well. We have that seed planted in our minds. And with the proper conditions, we could probably be equally cruel. If we were raised in a different way, had parents who taught us to be cruel in, going out and hunting and killing innocent animals in very, cruel ways, we might be just like that, right? We'd still have that soft spot, but we would have armored it. So it is important that we sort of understand that we're not that different than others. We just have learned through our engagement in the Dharma of different ways of being. So we can overcome that cruelty and counter it. Cruelty or harmfulness, Geshe Repton says, is a mental factor that, with a malicious intention devoid of any compassion or kindness, desires to belittle and disregard others. And of course, harming others certainly. It has the function of harming the good qualities of oneself and others. Because when we're in that mind of cruelty, we're of course harming any good qualities that we have. We are, you know, kind of going over them, railroading them, and not allowing them to arise. We're keeping our soft spot armored, in other words. And of course, it causes suffering for others and it damages their good qualities, having their lives, having where they live, having the possessions, because when we're cruel, we can do a lot of really horrible things to others and their world. B, it acts as a basis of turmoil. Again, look at the turmoil once more going on in our world on the basis of cruel behavior that doesn't see other beings who are in another country, who may have a different look than you, may have a different religion than you, may have different things that define them a little bit differently than how you define yourself, but that doesn't mean that they aren't beings worthy of compassion and love. So when we have a cruel mind, we can do all these things. It's the basis of the turmoil in our world. And C, of course, physically harming the lives of others. As I said, we can harm animals, we can harm human beings. We can do an awful lot through the cruel mind, this mental factor of cruelty, which we can see is not just the other ones we've talked about that are derived from anger. This has its own flavor of really getting to that place where there's no entryway right at that moment for compassion or kindness. Cruelty generally arises towards those that we regard as inferior to ourselves. This can take the form of actually causing physical harm to others or simply, out of resentment, ignoring a question put to one. Right? So again, we might actually harm others or we might just, ignore others or do things that are kind of cruel in the moment. But obviously, it's at its worst when we engage in those acts of harm towards any number of beings, one being all the way up through entire nations, entire peoples, what have you, or entire groups of beings, such as a beehive or whatever the case might be. We see them as inferior. I mean, this is very much a part of it, right? We see that their needs and what they have in their lives is not as important as what we have. This is why people can be cruel to animals often. Even look at the meat industry that we have. There's a lot of cruelty to animals in that industry where they cram beings into very tight spaces. And then when they kill them through pretty horrific ways. And there's so much fear in the animal. I remember that film about Temple Grandin. You probably recall. She's really quite impressive in her thinking and what have you, but it still is just a weird example where she tried to design a way for the cattle to be brought to slaughter so that the fear wouldn't arise, because they say that the fear in the mind of that that cow, actually affects the meat. And so the meat, it will not be as good a quality when they've had that fear. So she's actually having some compassion for how these beings are led, but it's with another motive, right? And anyway, I'm just pointing out the fact that humanity can be very cruel to a lot of beings, and as I said, cruel to each other. So when we see this once more, we can condemn those actions. We can speak out against those actions. We can do whatever we can to support something that is opposed to that, that is embracing the humanity and the sentience of other beings, embracing them as equally having rights to be happy, to be free from suffering, and try to do what we can to actually enact that, but refrain from this mind of cruelty. See when it starts to arise, because we do have the seeds of that, and try to do what you can to counter it. So let me just check in. I think I may have one or two things to go through the slides, but I thought I'd check in to see, are there any comments on those five or anything? Yeah, Eloise, please.
Yes, I kept thinking as in the same way that there is positive fear, there's
Mm,
also positive wrathfulness.
mm, mm,
And wrathfulness, I've always understood that it's actually quite separate, at least the positive wrathfulness is
yeah,
very separate from anger. That
mm,
it can be like a wrathful deity isn't an angry deity. It's a deity who's there to um, wake you up, shake you up, wake
yeah,
you up. In the
yeah.
same way that, I think maybe even you've used this example before, that if your kid is running out into traffic, you don't go, hey, come back. You grab them and say, get out of the road, and that's wrath. That's not anger. That's a real strong, positive
Mhm,
use.
mhm,
It's not anger. So I just wanted to
yeah.
point out that there is a
Mhm.
positive wrathfulness.
Yeah, and I think we tend to use that word in Buddhist circles, especially around the tantric deities, what have you, as that kind of energy. But it's even in the Bodhisattva vows. I think we're even called upon, if we see somebody doing something that's really harmful to others or themselves, to use force. I mean, we can maybe think of it as force. It's a compassionate force that is concerned again about everybody in the circle. It's not the mind of, delusion of anger where we are, you know, calling that person 100% negative and evil and trying to, get get them out of the picture because we're concerned about the victims. We're concerned about the perpetrator and the victims at that moment, seeing that both of them are in a situation of harm, one being harmed directly by what we call the perpetrator, but the other one creating future harm for themselves by virtue of the actions they're engaging in. That's even what drove the Buddha, in that lifetime as the Bodhisattva ship captain, to take the life of the one merchant so that the other ones wouldn't die, but moreover, so that that merchant wouldn't kill all those beings, right? There were like 499 other merchants he was going to kill. So the Buddha intervened as this Bodhisattva ship captain, took the life of that one man so he wouldn't do that. I mean, that's compassionate wrath. It's this, very different mind. And even recall when I went through anger, I talked about how His Holiness feels like anger may not always be the right word, because we can have this force in our world that is an appropriate response to harm that is being given to beings in our world. But once more, we try to include everybody in it. We don't just think, oh, these poor victims, they're innocent and we have to get rid of the perpetrator. We think, yeah, the poor perpetrator too, because the poor perpetrator is following this pattern and karmically connected with those beings and is going to keep creating the causes of future suffering. So we have, again, a more embracing compassion when we have wrath present. But I have the feeling that's a bit more of a Buddhist, definition of wrath as opposed to what we might find in a dictionary or something. I think when I looked it up, it was pretty much akin to what we see as belligerence and the delusion rather than a more positive force in our world. But thank you for bringing that up, Eloise, because it is important to acknowledge. That's sometimes the energy we need, right? That's going to just get in there and do what needs to be done to stop it, to get things broken apart, not harming beings in the process of that if we can avoid it. And if we have to do it, we do it again with a mind of compassion. So tough stuff. Anyone else, anything on those five and those patterns that come from anger? Okay. Let's go back. I think again, I don't know if that was the end of the slides. I think it is. Ah, okay, a little bit more on cruelty. There are three forms of cruelty, Geshe Rabtin says. Personally being unkind to others with the wish to disparage them, being unkind through causing others to do likewise, and being unkind through rejoicing when seeing or hearing of others being unkind. That's that kind of Schadenfreude, right? Where we take delight, rejoicing when we see others doing something unkind, and then we kind of participate in it by being unkind as well. We take delight in the unkindness of others. The second one, being unkind through causing others to do likewise, is where we become the impetus through our own behavior to cause others to engage in cruel or unkind behavior. And then the first one, personally being unkind with the wish to disparage others. We're not necessarily trying to get others involved, but with the others who have harmed us, who we see as negative, who we see as less than. We have that mind that wishes to disparage them. Um, I might mention, I have to I don't think I have that book in here with me. There's a wonderful book. I did teach on this whole idea of the power of bridging and, bridging our differences, I think was the class I did for all of you some time ago. There's a wonderful book by John A. Powers, who's a Berkeley professor. He's done a lot of research on bridging and othering. Othering is the behavior that supports cruelty, right? Othering is where we actually hold someone to be inferior. And he actually kind of has a little grid. And the idea is that you have on one axis the way that we see people as lower than us, as like undeserving. And that kind of course affects our view of them because we see them as subhuman sometimes even, right? This happens in our world. The other one has to do with the kind of utility that they have in our world, where some people do contribute greatly, but yet they are a little undesirable in terms of some other behavior patterns. So we might see them placed more in that quadrant. But the idea of othering kind of gets to its worst when we see people as undeserving, as kind of a despicable beings because of whatever views we've acquired in our life, treating people of other races or genders or sexual orientation or whatever as being undesirable. And then we also see their lack of utility, the fact that they aren't contributing to the world in these positive ways, again, according to our perception, maybe blind to what they are actually doing. But that's what is behind othering. And othering is very much a part of this mind of cruelty. I don't think you can be cruel to another being unless you've othered them in some way. You've made them as something inferior, undeserving, and therefore you can do whatever you want. And of course, we see this going on in our world, right? That's what's happening with regard to so many things in this country in particular. I don't need to go into them, but those behaviors are really horrible because once more, it doesn't kind of maintain this sort of equality, this equanimity among beings. I suppose that equanimity can be one way in Buddhist terms to counteract that othering, is to really see that we're all the same. We all have the same basic desires and wishes, and we can honor that and not other people. Okay, that is all of those. Let's go on to the opposite of non-harmfulness. I'm sorry, of harmfulness, what is called non-harmfulness or non-cruelty, non-violence. We'll go to what's said in Venerable Gyatso's book in a moment. Here's what the Dalai Lama and Venerable Chodron say. This is, again, the 11th of the 11 virtuous mental factors. I didn't put the whole list up there, but we can see those if you go to the list of 51 mental factors. Non-harmfulness or non-cruelty is compassion, lacking any intention to cause harm. It wishes all sentient beings to be free from suffering. It prevents disrespecting or harming others and increases the wish to benefit and bring them happiness. So it's the exact opposite of what we've been talking about, particularly that last of the five secondary mental factors derived from anger. This cruelty and harmfulness that needs to be dismantled through holding others through the lens of compassion again. We all possess these attitudes, Venerable Gyatso says, associated with anger, and harboring them in our mind is like inviting a gang of thugs into our home. To memorize this list and think tut tut is not good enough. We have to be intensely watchful of our mind, recognize the way these attitudes sneak in like party crashers, again, or, you know, crazy roommates, as I sometimes refer to with Venerable Rabina's language. They look acceptable, but they soon create mayhem, and we need to get rid of them. We need to find a way to be free of them so that they stop interrupting our party and everyone else's too. So that was general advice around working with these. Let's go back to Venerable Gyatso's text where he talks a bit more about non-harmfulness. This was page 97, I think. Let me go over a little bit. Um, Oh, and those are there's number 8, number 9, number 10, number 11. Number 11 of the virtuous mental factors. Non-harmfulness is compassion, unable to bear the suffering of others. It includes the courage and willingness to face any difficulty in rescuing others from suffering, and the absence of any intention to inflict harm on others. Simple compassion wishes others to be free from suffering. Non-harmfulness will not hurt others, even if they are harming us. Another word for this is nonviolence. Nonviolence, non-harmfulness means that we aren't going to resort to those behaviors and those mindsets that inform those behaviors because we have compassion in our hearts. We care about other beings. We don't want to see them harmed. Non-harmfulness is the essence of all Buddhist teachings. In fact, the Sanskrit word is ahimsa. Ah is always a negative, like non. Himsa is harmfulness or violence. So ahimsa was also the principle used by Gandhi in his nonviolent campaign to overcome the British imperialist forces in India. When His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, "My religion is kindness," he's referring to the mental factor of non-harmfulness. This is what we need to have, is a mind of kindness, compassion, care, concern towards everyone we meet. Excuse me. Pollen's catching up with me. Okay. So let's go back to, I don't know if there was much more in the slides on this. I think that may be it. Yeah, we went on then to the next root delusion, root affliction. So any final comments on this whole set of those that are derived from anger, anger itself, and then of course one of the main antidotes to that harmfulness, compassion, non-harmfulness, non-cruelty. Anyone? It's hard to practice, trust me. I mean, I struggle with it all the time, right? Because we see
Okay.
beings doing.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Ed,
Can you
yes,
hear me?
please. Yes, I can hear
Yeah.
you. Please go
It,
ahead.
it, yeah. The question is regarding this is an example. Stupid rich people are voting for taking food aid away from poor people.
Hmm.
It, this it's hard to understand.
Hmm.
So I don't know if you can
Yeah.
comment on that.
I know, and I mean, it's so hard for us to get our heads around the cruelty we see in our world, the injustices. I mean, look at what we've been dealing with in this country, which is even the income gap between those who are really, really well off and those who are poor, and dealing with, the struggles of everyday life just to put food on the table, to pay the rent, to do all the things that are necessary for just their basic life, much less, having nice things in their lives. But then the people at the top just continuing to want to have more money and more resources and more things that they can indulge in, essentially, is what we see. Again, but if we understand that these are, again, all karmic appearances, they're all derived by particular karmas. It's sad to see that people have that response in that way, so that somebody who has the good fortune of having a lot in their lives decides that they're going to be miserly and tight and take things away from people who don't have anything at all. I mean, it's a really horrible, unjust way of responding to that. Everything that led them to have that good fortune is not being furthered by the way they're working with their resources and their power to take things away from others. So again, it's not to say that we have this kind of karmic view that they're going to get theirs kind of thing. That's not the way to look at it, but just to have the understanding that this is a painful pattern that these beings are often involved in. They get to the sort of top, the higher level of having good resources and being able to not have to worry about anything, from the time they're born till the time they die, perhaps, and then suddenly have no additional karma they're creating because they use those resources in very selfish ways. So we can see them through some lens of compassion, through some lens of caring about them as suffering beings who are entrapped by so many of these same patterns that we can see in ourselves. But it doesn't mean that, once more, we are totally fine with their actions. Again, we do what we can to call our representatives and to get out and protest and do whatever needs to be done to show that we care about beings who are on the other end of the spectrum, who are being mistreated through this. And that's where what His Holiness was talking about, that form of anger, or that energy that is taking offense at the way beings are being treated in our world and not even being given what is necessary to sustain their lives, and the inequity that goes on with wealth, not just in this country, but in our world. So, And these are things to kind of remind us of the root delusions are all underneath the surface. It's hard to see those behaviors, and it's hard not to have a mind of anger and resentment towards people who have that good fortune. But we should rejoice in the causes they've created to have that and take issue with what they're doing now with those resources. If their power and their wealth is the impetus for removing what people who are much poorer need just for their daily sustenance, well, it's not such a good thing, right? Causing a lot more pain with their good fortune. So I don't know if that helps, Ed. It's one of the toughest things for us to get our heads around, right? How to work with these patterns that are in our world. But this is why during that retreat last week, I mentioned at the beginning, it was not without its challenges. There was one person there who was very much like living in that space of compassion and always wanting to do everything that's necessary to help anyone around her who needed help. And I love it. I mean, it's an admirable way to be in this world, and we need more people that exemplify that. But the problem with that often is that in my estimation, she got to this pattern of feeling like she needs to fix samsara. And samsara is never going to be fixed. I hate to tell you, the patterns that we see that are arising from delusion. We have the root of ignorance, remember, and it's giving rise to all the different delusions and different states of mind. Those cause karma, those cause the fruits of our experiences in samsara. The tree of samsara is poison, essentially. You're never going to be able to fix it. Yes, address what you can. By all means, I'm never going to tell anyone not to do something to try to address the inequities in the world. But that's not going to be fixed by fixing the external stuff. It's only going to be fixed when people change the internal stuff. So if we have an ability to help them to see their own minds and to see how they are creating these patterns that cause others harm as well as themselves harm, well, then we're giving them what they need, which is the medicine of the Dharma that will alleviate their suffering and the suffering of others. But it's not going to necessarily be fixed in the moment in samsara because samsara is a big old mess. It's all these deluded minds running around like bumper cars hitting each other all the time, and until people develop that inner wisdom and the qualities that come with that wisdom, with compassion, love, and so on, their situation fundamentally isn't going to change. It'll get better here, better there, worse here, worse there, whatever. It's kind of all over the place. But the real solution, as we see from the Buddha's teachings, is to change the minds of beings, to help them to be free of these patterns that are only exacerbating the suffering of everyone. So I tried to emphasize that with her, but of course, she sees herself as a helper. She sees herself as somebody. She said she like sat at somebody's bedside for 24 hours who needed like somebody there to tend to them, and that's great. I love her heart of gold that she's able to do that. But that is going to help in the moment, but it may even cause her to not be there for the next period, the next day or whatever, because she's sort of overextending and kind of not able to care for others in the wisest way. Remember, in Buddhism, we're always working with bodhicitta, which means, yes, our main goal is to benefit all beings. Our main goal is to help the people who are exorbitantly rich and the people who are unbelievably poor, and everyone in between. But we do that by developing ourselves. We do that by working on ourselves so that we are more qualified, so that we actually can help people address the root causes of these things rather than just the superficial experiences. Those things can be worked on. And I'm not saying don't work on them. I'm just saying don't think that you're going to fix it by solely working on those things, because that is not possible. As long as beings have delusions in their mind, they're going to continue to create these patterns. So, all right. Thank you, Ed. Anyone else, anything on these? This is a tough group. These really do touch on a lot of mind states that we can see in ourselves. Maybe not at the level that we see them in our world, but when you see them in your world, once more, recall that that is something you have the pattern for in your own mind. You've planted those seeds at one time or another. You've had that equally cruel, resentful, vengeful mind, whatever. But then also try to generate some level of compassion, seeing that others don't really even have the tools to address this. They're just following these delusions blindly, letting them guide them in their behavior so that they end up creating, again, more problems and difficulties for countless beings as well as for themselves. Okay, that concludes that. Let me just introduce at least the next root delusion. These are among the 6 root afflictions or delusions. Remember, the first 3, as I mentioned, are often called the 3 poisons. We're not going to go to ignorance, as I said earlier, until next week, probably. This will be number 4 in our presentation. But on a couple of pages, Venerable Gyatso talks about pride or self-importance. This is highlighted because of its effect on our inability to learn from others. If we have a prideful, superior mind, well, then once more, we are thinking of everyone as being inferior, as not having anything that they can offer to us, or we take advantage of them because of that mind of superiority. Let's look at what Geshe Rabten says. Arrogance or pride, self-importance, again, in his presentation, it was number 3 as well, is based on the view. Oh, I'm sorry, this isn't Venerable Geshe Rabten. This is the Dalai Lama in Venerable Chodron. Arrogance or pride, self-importance, is based on the view of a personal identity that apprehends an inherently existent I or mind. That's the ignorance that we're going to talk about next week. It's based on that. We have a pride based on a grasping at this real this I that we think exists in this false way, inherently, intrinsically, substantially, objectively. We use a lot of different words to describe it, but it doesn't exist at all. So there's this mistaken understanding that's at the root, definitely, of pride, as well as so many of the other delusions, so all of the other delusions. It strongly grasps an inflated or superior image of ourselves. In pride, this is the main thing, though, is we're not talking about other beings, we're talking about ourselves. We grasp this sense of I that we have inflated and thought of as superior in relation to others. And based on that, we then have a mind that holds our needs as more important than others, and so on. Self-importance is another term for pride that Geshe Rabten uses. It's a distinct mental factor that, based upon this view of the transitory composite, this is another term for that ignorance that grasps at an I. We'll talk about that. That's one of the 5 views that are set out within the root delusions, the 6 root delusions that we'll get back to again in the weeks to come. This view of the transitory composite kind of apprehends either this idea of an inherent I, an independent, substantial, objective I, or the possessor I, which is thought of as mine. That I think of myself as the possessor of this body, or the possessor of my computer, or the possessor of whatever. That's the nature of I that we often see in the world, is I as a possessor, as well as simply the I as the being who we cling to. It strongly grasps at an inflated or superior image of oneself based on that ignorance or this mistaken view. So what's happening with pride is that it all is revolving around the I. When we have, and again, all of the delusions to some extent are involved in the I. Don't think that this is only true for pride, but pride in particular, because we hold that view of this elevated sense of an I that we think is so real, and we hold it to be superior to other beings, that there's some superior quality to that inherently existent I. And of course, not knowing that it doesn't even exist. And of course, all that we build on top of it is all that improper mental attention that feeds our pride, thinking that we are superior in terms of our wealth, in terms of even our gender or race or whatever. We've got lots of ways that we can think of ourselves as superior to others. It's a bit of that othering thing I was talking about earlier. Might even think in regard to your qualities in terms of your spiritual development. Some people develop pride on the path. And that's why it's particularly set out as one of the root problems, is because if we have a pride that thinks that we know everything and that we can't learn from others, well, then we miss an awful lot of opportunities to be humble and to actually hold others as like teachers. We're not saying that they are our gurus necessarily, these beings that we might hold in a higher esteem, but at least acknowledge that other people have something they might be able to teach you, something they could share with you in terms of their way of looking at things or behaving that you can benefit from. So it kind of becomes an obstacle for our spiritual development because we aren't willing to embrace the true potential of others to help us on our path and to develop our qualities for their benefit. So if we kind of hold that, it's a bit of that kind of Lone Ranger mentality that we have so much in the US, right? That we're going to just do everything on our own. We don't need anyone else. We're quite fine, taking care of ourselves and what have you. Well, this flies right in the face of the world of interdependence that we live in, where we need others. There's interdependence. We do need others. And we need others, especially for our spiritual development. can't kind of develop yourself in a vacuum, kind of separated from all other beings and kind of trying to work on your mind in isolation. You need other beings. You need to be learning from them again and seeing them in that light. So let's take a look at some more of what Geshe Rabten says about this, and we'll conclude this in just a moment so we can see if there are any questions and do our dedication. Okay. Goes on to say, pride has the function of preventing the attainment of any higher virtues and of causing one to disrespect and look down upon others. Thereby, it leads one to painful and undesirable situations because the mind of pride is really a painful mind. It's, again, thinking of others in such a negative way. It has a bit of the flavor of cruelty to it often, right? As I said, it's a bit of that othering mind where we look down on others, we disrespect them. The basis for pride or self-importance is the view of the transitory composite. That is, the misconception that the elements of body and mind are either intrinsically I, or essentially mine, again, the possessor of things. This exaggerated conception consequently gives rise to self-important and proud feelings such as, look at me, how wise I am. Look at me, how beautiful I am, how rich I am, how fill in the blank, I am. Whatever it is the source of that pride. It's very much identified with how we see ourselves. And the false view of a self acts as the basis for the exaggeration of these qualities on that basis of a false I, a mistaken I. Due to this kind of thinking, a highly inflated image of oneself develops, and as a result, one becomes very conceited toward others. Although this mental factor produces an inflated sense of personal superiority, it is not a real superiority, but merely a false conceptual fabrication. We don't know even the qualities that others have. We make assumptions. We might look down on others on the basis of these various factors and assume that we have greater qualities than they do. But that's an assumption. It's maybe completely out of touch with what is actually going on for that being in comparison to ourselves. Once it arises, pride automatically causes us to be envious of superiors, competitive with equals, and arrogant towards inferiors. Thus, it creates a tense and hostile atmosphere. In worldly pursuits, it may appear to be a useful quality, the pride one takes in one's own, accomplishments and what have you. But in the practice of Dharma, it is only an obstacle to our development because it causes us to have that distorted view of ourselves in relation to others. In Tibet, there is a proverb that says, the water of knowledge can never remain on the balloon of pride. This means that as long as we maintain this inflated image of ourselves, it will be impossible to learn or understand anything from others. However, if we cultivate humility and deflate the image we have of ourselves, it will be possible to develop all forms of virtue and insight. So what I'd like to encourage you to do over the next week is to take note in regard to those 5 close afflictions that are derived from anger. They're listed here. And again, you'll have these slides. I'll post them on the Google Drive tonight. And apply any of the antidotes to anger to them as well. And for jealousy, you can also apply the more specific antidote of rejoicing, for example, and others' good qualities, their good fortune, and so on. That's a way to counter some of that envy or jealousy. And that's it. I'm gonna have more on pride next week because we are going to take a look at kind of the types of pride, because pride actually has 9 different types. Sorry, no, 7. I think it's 7. 7 different types. Sorry, 7 different types. There's 9 different kind of relationships of pride. We'll see that later in Venerable Gyatso's book. But there are 7 different types of pride, depending upon how that pride is manifesting. So hold off on pride. I'm just introducing it as part of tonight, and know that next week we'll go into it in more detail, and I'll go through some of the antidotes to pride, and you can work with that. For tonight, continue to work with anger, that we talked about a few weeks ago, and then also these 5 that are derived from anger, becoming familiar with the antidote. So when you see those minds begin to arise, you have some force to put up against them, to be the counterforce to them. So any questions from tonight? Anything anyone wanted to ask in relation to this? Okay. I don't see any questions, any hands. Stella, did you have one? No? Okay. Oh, I can't hear you. You're muted. Yeah. Here, I can do ask to unmute, and then I think you will get a thing that you can click on to unmute. Did it come up? Yeah, there you go. What were you going to say, Stella?
No, I was going to say thanks. I just got back. Didn't even get water, but
Oh,
Thank you
Oh,
very
I'm
much for
sorry.
coming, though.
Oh, sure, sure, sure.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Again, my hope is I'll be there in person next week, barring any escalation of this illness, whatever is going on. I think again, it's just a cold of some sort together with allergies. So I will hopefully be much better in a week. But all right, if there's no other questions, then let's go ahead and do our dedications. Jana, do you have the prayer list that you could recite the names so we can make sure we dedicate specifically for them? And if people need to add names, please let us know. Okay. We're not we're not hearing you. Are you talking right now or? Yeah, I'm not hearing you. Hmm. Yeah, John, do you know what's happening there? Because it looks like you're unmuted there. There we go. I hear you now.
You can hear me now? Okay.
Yep. Oh, oh,
That's awesome.
you might mute the TV. There. Okay. If you mute the TV, then I think it'll
Dedicate the
stop.
merit created by listening to this teaching to all beings everywhere on every prayer list. We dedicate for the health and long life of all our precious teachers, that they may continue to teach us and guide our practices. We dedicate for all those experiencing obstacles, specifically Jana, those experiencing illness, specifically Lori and Donla, and those who have died recently, all those who have died due to war and violence.
Okay, and I have, my cousin just passed away. Her name was Lydia Ruiz. She died,
Lydia Ruiz.
yeah, kidney cancer in California. She's my first cousin.
What day, Stella?
She died last, let's see. She died, I think it's been a week and a half. So, oh, here it is, March 7th.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and so for those beings and anyone else that we're holding in our hearts, we dedicate so that they can be free from their suffering and find the causes that will lead them to unparalleled happiness and bliss. Okay, let's go ahead and do the prayers together. The dedication prayers I'll put on the screen. And, oh, that's not the right thing. That's one of my other things. That's the Google Drive reminding me that I need to post that there. The slides from tonight. Where is that? Ah, here it is. Okay. Because, yeah, I had that other file up. Here's the prayers. Let's do the dedication prayers together. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish but increase more and more. Then for His Holiness in particular, we'll recite this verse and also extend it out as we did with that dedication from Jana to all of our spiritual guides so they can have good health, long lives, and all their wishes fulfilled. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And again, seeing how our spiritual director, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, is needed in this world, as is His Holiness and all these amazing guides. With what's going on in our world, we need the presence of these beings to help us and others to find the Dharma and practice it. So for the swift identification of Rinpoche's reincarnation and for everything to be auspicious, for that being to be of incredible benefit to the beings in this world, let's recite this prayer. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings, through explanation and practice, you are the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And with everything going on in our world, let's add that dedication for peace in our world, for there to be an end to all war and conflict, and for all the beings affected by that to be relieved from their suffering and to find everything they need to restore even just their general well-being. Again, so many beings being harmed by that. So just send that positive energy out, become somewhat of a force for that. But as I said earlier tonight, also get out there in the streets, do what you can to protest, what is going on in this country in particular, if you find it something you need to protest. But I know there's some people who may not. But nonetheless, in Buddhist terms, this is not good that it's going on, and we want an end to it. All these harmful minds of anger and negligence of other beings to be replaced by compassion and love. Okay, thank you all. Glad you joined tonight. And again, I appreciate the understanding and not getting me to drive all the way up there. I don't think I would have made it. I fell asleep, like I said, this afternoon. So I just don't think I had the energy to make the drive and do all that. I made it through the class, through all of your kindness. I always am energized by other people. So thank you. And I will look forward to seeing you up there in Taos next Thursday. All right. Be well. Blessings to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doc.
Get
Thank you,
well.
Doc.
Thank you. Feel
Hope
better.
you feel better. Get better. Thank you.